Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. The courthouse steps were slick with February rain when Jake Tanner first held his daughter Emma as a divorced man. She was 3 then, small enough that her head fit perfectly under his chin, her tiny fingers gripping his jacket like she'd never let go. He remembered thinking that no legal document, no judge's signature, could sever what mattered most. 2 years later, standing in his kitchen with cream-colored cardstock in his hands, he understood how wrong he'd been. The wedding invitation was unnecessarily ornate. Embossed gold lettering announced the union of Allison Baxter and Richard Foley, set for the first Saturday in June at the Riverside Country Club. Jake ran his thumb over his ex-wife's name, feeling the raised letters beneath his skin. 5 years of marriage, 2 years of bitter divorce proceedings, and now this. The invitation specified, adults only reception, in elegant script at the bottom, but someone had scrawled in pen, Emma can attend ceremony only. R.F. insists. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her kindergarten uniform, blonde hair escaping from her ponytail. At 5 years old, she had Allison's blue eyes but Jake's stubborn chin, a combination that made his chest ache every time he looked at her. "Daddy, is that from Mommy?" Jake set the invitation on the counter. "Yeah, sweetheart, it's about her wedding. The one where she marries Richard." Emma's voice went small. She'd been calling him Richard since the beginning, never Uncle Richard or anything warmer. Jake had never pushed it, watching his daughter's instincts prove sharper than any adult's. "I don't like Richard." "Why not?" Jake kept his tone casual, crouching to her level. He'd asked before, but Emma always grew quiet, shaking her head. This time she bit her lip. "He says mean things when Mommy's not listening. He says I'm loud and annoying." Her eyes filled with tears. "He said I wasn't supposed to exist." Jake pulled her into his arms, fury building beneath his skin like magma, but he'd learned patience in the 2 years since the divorce. Allison had weaponized the courts against him, painting him as unstable, unreliable. Her attorney, Warren McDaniel, had been ruthless. Jake had lost the house, most of their savings, and gotten reduced custody every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. The judge, swayed by Allison's tearful testimony about his angry outbursts and obsessive behavior, had called Jake's request for equal custody unrealistic given the circumstances. Those circumstances were manufactured. Jake taught American history at Lincoln High School, where his students consistently scored in the top percentile and parents requested him by name. He'd never raised his voice in anger, never shown the volatility Allison described under oath. But her narrative had been careful, constructed with McDaniel's precision, a controlling husband who tracked her movements, questioned her friends, made her feel trapped. None of it true, all of it believed. "Hey," Jake said, pulling back to look at Emma. "How about we make spaghetti tonight? The kind with the meatballs you like to roll?" Emma's smile came back, small but genuine. "Can we make them really big? Enormous?" He stood, lifting her onto his hip, though she was getting heavy. "Big as baseballs." While Emma washed her hands, Jake looked at the invitation again. He'd known this was coming. Richard Foley had entered Allison's life 8 months after their divorce was finalized, though Jake suspected the timeline was more generous than accurate. Richard owned 3 luxury car dealerships across the state, drove a different vehicle every week, and wore suits that cost more than Jake's monthly salary. He was 42 to Allison's 34. Handsome in that practiced way of men who spent significant time and money on their appearance. Jake had done his research. Not the obsessive stalking Allison had accused him of, but the methodical investigation he'd teach his students to conduct when examining historical sources. Richard Foley's business success was legitimate. His divorce from his first wife, Brandy Frederick, 10 years ago, apparently amicable. No criminal record, no red flags. On paper, Richard was exactly what Allison wanted. Wealthy, successful, stable. But paper lied. Jake had learned that lesson well. He'd started paying attention 4 months ago, when Emma came home with a bruise on her arm. "I fell," she'd said, but her eyes slid away from his. Jake had documented it, taken photos, called his attorney Lester Darling. Without more evidence, Lester had said carefully, "Accusations will look like harassment, especially given your history." His history, the narrative Allison created. So, Jake had become careful. He'd purchased a small recorder, the kind that looked like a keychain, and tucked it into Emma's backpack when she stayed at Allison's house. Not in her bedroom, he wasn't a monster, but in common areas where conversations happened. He'd told himself it was wrong even as he pressed the purchase button. Then he'd listened to the first recording and felt his soul go cold. She's so fucking needy. Allison's voice sharp with whine. Always wanting stories, wanting attention. I can't wait until she's older and less exhausting. You should send her to that boarding school in Connecticut. Richard's voice, smooth. My cousin's kids go there. Year-round program. Jake would never agree. Jake doesn't have to know until it's done. You have primary custody, your attorney said. The recording had cut off there. Emma's backpack apparently moved. But Jake had heard enough. He'd collected 6 more recordings over the following months. Each one carved pieces from his heart. Richard's casual cruelty. Allison's agreement. Their plans to phase him out entirely after the wedding. Using Richard's money to fund legal battles Jake couldn't afford to fight. The meatballs are ready. Emma called from the kitchen, and Jake pushed the thoughts away. Tonight was about being her father. Tomorrow he'd continue his work. Because Jake Tanner had learned patience. He'd learned to document, to wait, to plan. And he'd learned that sometimes justice required more than courtroom appeals and measured responses. Sometimes it required showing people exactly who they were in front of everyone they wanted to impress. The wedding was 12 weeks away. Jake marked it on his calendar with a black X and began to prepare. Morris Massey had been teaching alongside Jake for 7 years, and he noticed the change immediately. "You're plotting something?" Morris said one afternoon in the teacher's lounge, watching Jake sort through printed screenshots on his laptop. "I know that look. That's your students are about to learn about the Watergate investigation in excruciating detail look." Jake glanced up. Morris was 56, taught English literature, and had been through 2 divorces himself. If anyone would understand, it was him. Allison's getting married. Ah. Morris sat down, bringing his coffee with him. The invitation arrived. Last week. Jake closed his laptop. Emma's invited to the ceremony, but not the reception. Richard's rules. Morris's jaw tightened. That's cruel. It's strategic. Jake kept his voice level. They're establishing the pattern now. After the wedding, they'll argue that Emma needs stability. That my weekends disrupt her routine. They'll request I only get supervised visits. Then holidays only. Then nothing. Morris finished. He'd fought similar battles with his second ex-wife. Lost most of them. What are you going to do? Jake considered the question. Morris was trustworthy, but involving others meant risk. Still, he needed a witness. Someone who could testify, if needed, that Jake's evidence was gathered properly. "I'm going to attend the wedding. Even though you're not invited, I'm the father of the bride's daughter. That makes me family." Jake smiled without humor. Besides, Allison made a mistake. The invitation is addressed to the Tanner family. Plural. She probably didn't even read it before Warren McDaniel's office sent them out. Morris leaned back, studying him. "Jake, be careful. Whatever you're planning." "I'm not planning anything illegal." It was mostly true. The recordings existed in a gray area. Colorado was a one-party consent state, and Emma had been present for all of them. Whether a 5-year-old constituted a consenting party was debatable, but Jake had consulted with 3 attorneys, none of whom were Lester. The consensus was murky enough to work with. "I'm just going to share some home videos." Home videos that will show everyone exactly who Allison and Richard really are. Jake's voice hardened. "They've spent 2 years making me look like a monster. I'm going to spend 300 guests worth of time showing them the truth." Morris was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "What do you need?" That evening, Jake sat in his home office and reviewed his materials. He'd organized them chronologically, building a narrative the way he'd teach his students to construct a historical argument. Evidence. Context. Conclusion. Recording 1. Allison and Richard discussing Emma as an inconvenience, mocking her fear of the dark, laughing about how she cried when they left her alone in her room. Date. February 14th. Valentine's Day. Emma had mentioned being scared that night. Recording 2. Richard, on the phone with his attorney, discussing how to minimize the father's involvement post-marriage. The attorney, who wasn't Warren McDaniel, had suggested documenting any instance where Jake was late for pickup, forgot to pack something, made any mistake. "Build a pattern," the attorney said. Even good fathers slip up. We use those slip-ups. Recording 3. Allison, talking to her friend, Cecilia Sampson, admitting she'd exaggerated claims about Jake's behavior during the divorce. I mean, he was distant sometimes, but Warren said I needed something concrete for the judge. So I gave her concrete. Jake had nearly destroyed his desk when he'd heard that one. Recording 4. Richard losing his temper with Emma when she'd spilled juice. The sound of his hand hitting the table made Jake's blood pressure spike, even on replay. Emma's crying. Richard's voice, low and vicious. Stop being such a fucking baby. You're pathetic. Recording 5. Allison complaining about the cost of Emma's piano lessons, which Jake paid for. I don't know why we have to keep pretending he's a good father. After the wedding, we should just cut him loose. It's not like Emma will miss him once we're in the Caymans half the year. The Caymans. That had been news. Jake had researched immediately and found that Richard had purchased a vacation property there 8 months ago. The kind of property you could claim as a primary residence if you wanted to establish custody in a different jurisdiction. Recording 6. A conversation between Richard and an unknown man about his previous marriage. Brandy was smarter than Allison, Richard had said. She knew when to fold. This one thinks she's got leverage because of the kid. You keeping the kid in the picture? For now. Once we're married and I've got legal standing, we'll phase the father out and ship her off to school. Then, Allison and I can actually enjoy our lives. Jake had played that recording 20 times, memorizing every word. Emma wasn't his daughter to Richard. She was an obstacle. A problem to be solved. The video evidence was more limited, but equally damning. Jake had hired Sam Duran, a private investigator who looked like someone's grandfather and had a spotless reputation. Sam had obtained footage of Richard screaming at a valet, shoving a restaurant hostess, berating a young employee at one of his dealerships until the kid was visibly shaking. Not illegal, but revealing. Then, there was the footage Jake didn't hire anyone to get. His own doorbell camera had captured Allison dropping Emma off one Sunday evening, 2 hours late. Emma had been crying in the back seat. When Jake had asked what was wrong, Allison had snapped. She's fine. Stop being so dramatic. She's manipulating you because she knows you'll fall for it. Emma's voice, small and broken. Mommy said I couldn't have dinner until I apologized for being bad. What did you do that was bad? Jake had asked. I asked if Daddy could come to Mommy's wedding. The video showed Allison's face clearly, showed her rolling her eyes, showed her saying, loud enough for the camera to catch. Your father isn't invited because he's not family anymore. You need to understand that. Jake had filed that moment away in the same mental folder where he kept every other wound Allison had inflicted. The collection was extensive. His phone rang. Lester Darling's name appeared on screen. Jake, I got your message about the wedding, Lester said without preamble. I don't think attending is a good idea. Why not? I'm on the invitation. You know what I mean. If you're planning to cause a scene, I'm planning to exercise my rights as Emma's father. Jake kept his tone measured. Unless there's a legal reason I can't attend a wedding I was invited to. Lester sighed. No, there's no legal prohibition. But Jake, listen to me carefully. Whatever evidence you think you have, whatever you're planning to reveal, it needs to go through proper channels. The court, not a wedding reception. They banned Emma from the reception, Jake said quietly. Her own mother's wedding reception, because Richard thinks she's an inconvenience. The line was silent for a long moment. Lester had 2 daughters of his own. That's cruel, he finally said. But public humiliation isn't the answer. It'll make you look vindictive. I already look vindictive. Allison made sure of that. Jake rubbed his temples. I appreciate the advice, Lester. I really do. But I've been doing this the right way for 2 years. Filing motions, requesting mediation, being the bigger person. And I've watched my daughter suffer for it. Jake, I'll be in touch after the wedding. He ended the call before Lester could argue further. Morris had agreed to help with the technical aspects. He knew a guy, Doug Bryan, who ran audio-visual equipment for conferences and events. Doug asked no questions when Morris explained they needed a way to connect a phone to a venue's projector system remotely. Bluetooth adapter, Doug had said, handing over a small device. Syncs with your phone, overrides their controls if you're within range. Technically, it's for accessibility purposes, but he'd shrugged. Jake tested it 3 times in his classroom, making sure he could control the projection seamlessly. The last thing he needed was technical failure when the moment came. Emma's therapy sessions had increased to twice a week. Dr. Rita Wise was patient, kind, and increasingly concerned. Emma's anxiety is manifesting in new ways, Dr. Wise had told Jake during their last parent consultation. She's afraid of disappointing people, afraid of being bad. That kind of fear doesn't develop in a vacuum. Her mother tells her she's inconvenient, Jake had said flatly. Her soon-to-be stepfather calls her pathetic. Dr. Wise had looked at him sharply. Do you have evidence of this? Yes. Have you presented it to the court? I'm working on it. Now, sitting in his office with 12 weeks turned to 4. Jake knew he was past the point of traditional channels. The courts had failed Emma. His attorneys had failed Emma. The system that was supposed to protect children had looked at Allison's tears and designer suits and believed every word, while dismissing Jake as a bitter ex-husband grasping for control. So Jake would bypass the system entirely. He'd take his case directly to the 300 people Allison most wanted to impress: her family, Richard's business associates, their wealthy friends. He'd show them the recordings, the videos, the evidence of who these people really were behind closed doors. And he'd let social consequences do what legal ones couldn't. Emma wandered into his office, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Daddy, I can't sleep. Jake immediately closed his laptop and held out his arms. She climbed into his lap, warm and small and trusting. Bad dream? No. Just thinking about Mommy's wedding. She picked at her rabbit's ear. Do I have to go? Everything in Jake wanted to say no. Wanted to keep her safe from whatever public spectacle was coming. But he also knew Emma needed to see that her father would fight for her, that he wouldn't let her be erased. How about this? He said carefully. We'll go to the ceremony. We'll sit in the back, and if you want to leave at any point at all, we leave. Deal? Emma considered this. Will Richard be mean to me? Not if I'm there. That was a promise. And sweetheart, no matter what happens, I need you to know something. You are not a mistake. You are not an inconvenience. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. She hugged him tightly. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Em. More than anything. After he tucked her back into bed, Jake returned to his office and made the final edits to his presentation. 90 seconds of carefully compiled evidence. Enough to destroy carefully constructed lies. Enough to show 300 people exactly who Allison Baxter and Richard Foley really were. He thought about Lester's warning, Morris's concern, even Dr. Wise's careful skepticism about his methods. They weren't wrong to worry. What Jake was planning existed in a moral gray area. Legal enough not to land him in jail. Questionable enough to potentially backfire. But he'd spent 2 years watching Emma's light dim. 2 years being called a liar, an exaggerator, a bitter ex-husband. 2 years of Allison rewriting their history and the courts believing her version. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing weren't the same. Jake had taught that lesson when covering civil disobedience, whistleblowers, every person throughout history who decided that unjust systems required extraordinary action. Now he'd live it. The wedding was 4 weeks away. Jake marked another X on his calendar and prepared for war. The Riverside Country Club sprawled across 15 acres of manicured grounds. The kind of place where memberships were inherited, and the waiting list was longer than Emma's lifetime. Jake had driven past it dozens of times, but never imagined he'd walk through its marble-columned entrance. Yet, here he was on the first Saturday in June, wearing his best suit with Emma's hand in his, both of them hovering at the edge of the valet station. Remember what we talked about? Jake said quietly, crouching to Emma's level. She wore a pale yellow dress that Allison had sent over, probably chosen by her wedding coordinator to match some color scheme. If you want to leave, I tell you, and we go. Emma nodded, but her blue eyes were wide with anxiety. Will Mommy be happy to see me? Jake's heart cracked. Of course she will, sweetheart. The lie tasted bitter, but what else could he say? The truth that Allison had tried to exclude Emma entirely, that only his insistence and the vague wording of the invitation had gotten them this far would destroy what little relationship Emma still had with her mother. They entered through the main doors, following signs toward the Riverside Ballroom. The ceremony was being held in a glass-enclosed garden room with a view of the club's private lake. Jake could see it through the windows. 300 white chairs arranged in neat rows, a flower-draped arch at the altar, and enough roses to stock a florist for a month. Mr. Tanner? A young woman with a clipboard appeared, her smile professional but cool. I'm Stacy Woods, the wedding coordinator. I wasn't aware you'd be attending. Family invitation, Jake said pleasantly, pulling out the cream cardstock from his jacket pocket. It's addressed to the Tanner family, which includes Emma and myself. Stacy's smile tightened. I see. Well, the ceremony is about to begin. I'll need to find you seats. We're happy in the back. Jake had already spotted the last row, near the exit. Perfect positioning. That's not Stacy caught herself. Of course. Right this way. The ballroom was already filling with guests. Jake recognized some of them. Allison's parents, Gary and Jeanette Winter, holding court near the front. Her brother Donnie White and his wife Carrie Kennedy. Richard's business associates, men in expensive suits with trophy wives. Allison's college friends, women who'd testified during the divorce about Jake's supposed controlling behavior. Warren McDaniel, the attorney, was seated 3 rows back, his presence a reminder that legal threats were always close. Emma's hand squeezed his as they walked the long aisle to the back row. Jake could feel eyes following them, hear the whispers starting. He kept his expression neutral, pleasant even, just a father bringing his daughter to her mother's wedding. Nothing to see here. They'd barely settled when music swelled from hidden speakers. The processional was beginning. Richard appeared first, walking down the aisle with practiced confidence. He wore a charcoal gray tuxedo that probably cost more than Jake's car, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile wide and winning. He looked like a man who'd won everything he'd ever wanted. Jake's hand moved to his phone in his pocket. The presentation was loaded. The Bluetooth adapter Doug had provided was in his other pocket, ready to sync. He just needed the right moment. Richard reached the altar and turned, waiting. The bridesmaids came next in flowing champagne-colored gowns. Allison's friends, all of them women who'd cut Jake from their lives the moment Allison reframed their history. They smiled at Richard, took their positions. Then, the wedding march began. Allison appeared at the back of the room on her father Gary's arm, and Jake had to admit she looked stunning. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant twist, her makeup flawless. She looked like a woman who'd left her past behind and was stepping into a perfect future. Emma stood up on her chair to see better, and Jake steadied her automatically. "Mommy's pretty," Emma whispered. "Very pretty," Jake agreed. Allison's eyes swept the crowd as she walked down the aisle. They landed on Emma for a brief moment, her expression flickering with something Jake couldn't quite read. Then, she looked away, her smile never wavering. The ceremony began. The officiant, a friend of Richard's named Bradley Stokes, kept it mercifully brief. Standard vows, exchange of rings, the usual pronouncements. Jake watched it all with detachment, his mind already on what came next. "You may kiss the bride," Bradley announced. Richard pulled Allison into a dramatic kiss that earned applause from the crowd. Then they turned, newly married, and began the recessional back down the aisle. This was when things deviated from the plan. Instead of walking directly to the reception area for photos, Allison stopped midway down the aisle. Richard looked confused for a moment, then seemed to understand. He gestured to someone off to the side, and Stacy Woods appeared with a microphone. Jake's instincts screamed warning. "Before we head to the reception," Allison said into the microphone, her voice amplified across the ballroom, "I want to take a moment to acknowledge how special this day is." Applause rippled through the crowd. Emma was still standing on her chair, watching her mother with hopeful eyes. "Richard and I are so grateful to everyone here for celebrating with us," Allison continued. She looked radiant, commanding the room with practiced ease. "This is a fresh start for us. A new chapter." She paused, and Jake saw it coming a split second before it happened. Saw the way her eyes hardened, the way Richard's smile turned sharp. A new chapter means leaving old mistakes behind. Allison's gaze landed on Emma, and Jake moved without thinking, stepping in front of his daughter. Unfortunately, some mistakes are harder to leave in the past than others. The ballroom went quiet. People shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. "Emma, sweetheart, come here," Allison called out. Jake's hand tightened on Emma's shoulder. "You don't have to." But Emma was already moving, conditioned to obey her mother. She climbed down from the chair and walked toward Allison, her yellow dress bright against the white aisle runner. Allison reached down and pulled Emma up onto the small stage, where she and Richard stood. Emma looked tiny next to them, confused but trying to smile. "This is my daughter," Allison said to the crowd, as if they didn't already know. "And I love her. But Richard and I have decided that our future, our family needs to move forward without certain complications." Jake was already moving down the aisle, but Allison spoke faster. "Emma will be attending boarding school in Connecticut starting this fall. It's a wonderful opportunity for her to get the education and structure she needs." Allison's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Unfortunately, that means she won't be joining us for the reception today. This is an adults-only celebration, and we need to establish those boundaries now." Emma's face crumpled. "But Mommy..." "Don't argue, sweetheart." Allison's tone was saccharine. "You understand, don't you? You're not really invited to this part." Then, she did it. The thing Jake would replay in his mind for years. Allison lifted her bouquet, a cascade of white roses and orchids, and tossed it directly at Emma's face. Not gently, not playfully. With force, the flowers hit Emma square in the chest. She stumbled backward, started to fall, and Jake lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. Emma sobbed into his shoulder, her small body shaking. The ballroom was dead silent, except for her crying. Jake stood slowly, Emma in his arms. He looked at Allison, at Richard, at the 300 guests watching with expressions ranging from shock to carefully neutral observation. "Actually," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom, "she is invited." He pulled out his phone with his free hand, keeping Emma secure against his chest. The Bluetooth adapter synced instantly with the ballroom's projection system. Doug's device worked perfectly. The large screen behind the altar, previously displaying a montage of Allison and Richard's engagement photos, flickered. "What are you?" Allison started. Jake pressed play. The screen lit up with the first recording. Audio only, but crystal clear. Allison's voice filled the ballroom. "She's so fucking needy. Always wanting stories. Wanting attention. I can't wait until she's older and less exhausting." Richard's response: "You should send her to that boarding school in Connecticut." Jake watched the crowd's faces. Watched Allison's parents, Gary and Jeanette, go rigid in their seats. Watched Warren McDaniel pull out his phone, probably preparing to intervene legally. The recording continued, Richard discussing how to minimize the father's involvement post-marriage. Allison laughing about exaggerating Jake's behavior during the divorce. Richard losing his temper with Emma. The sound of his hands slamming the table, making several guests flinch. "Turn it off," Allison hissed, rushing toward Jake. But the presentation was timed. Next came the video clips. Richard screaming at the valet, shoving the hostess. The doorbell camera footage of Allison denying Emma dinner because she'd asked about her father attending the wedding. All 300 guests watched in horrified silence. The final clip was the most recent. Emma's therapy session from 3 weeks ago, which Dr. Rita Wise had agreed to record with Emma's permission after Jake explained what was happening. Emma's small voice: "I don't think Mommy wants me anymore. Richard says I'm a problem." Dr. Wise's gentle response: "Why do you think that?" "Because they talk about sending me away where I can't bother them, and Daddy won't be able to visit because it's really far." Emma had started crying in the recording. "I just want Mommy to love me like she used to." The screen went black. The ballroom remained silent. Jake looked at Allison, who stood frozen on the stage, her perfect face contorted with rage and humiliation. Richard was red-faced, looking ready to explode. Warren McDaniel was already making his way toward them, his expression calculating. "You had no right," Allison started. "I have every right." Jake's voice was steel. "I'm her father, and I will not let you erase her from your life like she's some inconvenient detail." "That recording is illegal," Warren interjected, reaching them. "You'll be facing charges for invasion of privacy, harassment." "Colorado is a one-party consent state," Jake said calmly. "Emma was present for every conversation, and the video from my own doorbell camera is perfectly legal." He looked at Warren directly. "But please, call the police. I'd love to explain to them why you're more concerned about privacy laws than child welfare." Gary Winter was standing now, his face ashen. "Allison, is this true? Did you really say those things about Emma?" Allison's mouth opened and closed. Daddy, you don't understand. Jake manipulated. I heard your voice, Gary said quietly. I heard what you said about our granddaughter. Jeanette was crying, her hands over her mouth. Around the ballroom, guests were whispering, pulling out their phones. Jake knew the videos were already being shared, uploaded, spread across social media. By tomorrow, everyone in Allison and Richard's social circle would know exactly who they really were. I think we should go, Jake said, adjusting Emma in his arms. She'd stopped crying, but was still trembling. You've ruined everything, Allison spat, her composure shattering. You miserable, pathetic. I showed everyone the truth. Jake's voice was quiet but firm. You did this to yourself. He turned and walked back down the aisle, Emma's face buried in his shoulder. The crowd parted for them like water. No one tried to stop them. Behind him, he heard Richard shouting, Allison crying, chaos erupting. Warren was probably already on the phone with his legal team. Gary and Jeanette were confronting their daughter. The perfect wedding was disintegrating in real time. Jake carried Emma out of the ballroom, through the marble halls, into the June sunshine. His car was waiting where he'd parked it, deliberately close to the exit. He buckled Emma into her car seat and got behind the wheel. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up with him. Daddy? Emma's voice was small. Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. Jake twisted in his seat to look at her. Nothing at all. This is all going to be okay. Is Mommy mad at you? Probably. He managed to smile. But that's okay too. As they drove away from the country club, Jake's phone started ringing. Lester Darling, Morris Massey. Numbers he didn't recognize. He silenced them all and focused on driving. Emma fell asleep before they reached the highway, exhausted from the emotional toll. Jake drove carefully, protectively, his daughter's soft breathing the only sound he needed. What he'd done today would have consequences. Legal ones, probably. Social ones, certainly. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror at Emma's sleeping face, he felt no regret. Justice, he'd learned, sometimes required breaking the rules everyone else followed, and protecting his daughter was worth any price he'd have to pay. The war was just beginning, but Jake Tanner had fired the opening shot, and he'd made damn sure it counted. The media explosion happened faster than even Jake anticipated. By Sunday morning, his phone had 47 missed calls, and his email was flooded with messages from reporters, bloggers, and random strangers who'd seen the wedding video online. Someone had recorded his presentation on their phone and uploaded it everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Reddit. By noon, number wedding exposure was trending nationally. Jake ignored all of it and made Emma pancakes. The strawberries looked like hearts, Emma observed, poking at her breakfast. She seemed lighter than yesterday, as if some invisible weight had lifted. Are you sad about Mommy's wedding? No, sweetheart. I'm not sad. Jake sat across from her with his coffee. The truth was more complicated. He wasn't sad. But he wasn't triumphant either. What he'd done had been necessary, but it didn't erase the fact that Emma's mother had publicly called her a mistake. That wound would take time to heal. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Morris Massey, so Jake answered. Have you seen the news? Morris asked without preamble. I've been avoiding it. Probably wise. But Jake, listen, you've got national attention now. Good Morning America wants an interview. So does the Today Show. CNN is calling you a whistleblower for parental rights. Fox is calling you a vindictive ex-husband who violated privacy laws. It's chaos. Jake rubbed his temples. I'm not doing interviews. That's probably smart too. But you should know Warren McDaniel held a press conference this morning. Allison and Richard are claiming you doctored the recordings. They're threatening to sue for defamation, emotional distress, and about 6 other things. Let them sue. Jake's voice was flat. Every recording is time-stamped and backed up in 3 locations. I've got Dr. Wise's testimony about Emma's emotional state. I've got my doorbell camera footage showing Allison denying our daughter food as punishment. If they want to take this to court, I'll bury them in discovery. Morris was quiet for a moment. You've really thought this through. I've had 2 years to think it through. After they hung up, Jake finally looked at the news coverage. Morris hadn't been exaggerating. The video from the wedding had been viewed over 12 million times. The comment sections were vicious, split between people praising Jake for exposing abuse and people condemning him for ruining a wedding. But the tide seemed to be turning in Jake's favor. Parenting blogs were analyzing the recordings. Child psychologists were weighing in on Emma's therapy session, and several prominent family law attorneys were calling for an investigation into how Allison had been granted primary custody in the first place. Then, Jake saw the statement from Richard Foley's dealerships. All three locations had released identical statements distancing themselves from their owners' personal matters and promising that the values expressed in the leaked recordings do not reflect our company culture. It was corporate speak for "we're terrified customers will boycott us." Jake's email pinged with a message from Lester Darling. Emergency hearing scheduled for Wednesday, 9 a.m. Judge Betsy Ferguson wants to see both parties immediately regarding custody arrangements. "Call me," Jake called. "This is what you wanted," Lester said, and he didn't sound happy. "But Jake, you need to understand what's coming. Warren is going to paint you as an obsessive stalker who violated his ex-wife's privacy and traumatized their daughter at a wedding. He's going to demand supervised visitation, maybe even a restraining order. Based on what grounds? I provided evidence of abuse and neglect. Based on the grounds that you secretly recorded conversations and ambushed them at their wedding." Lester sighed. "I'm not saying he's right. I'm saying he's going to make those arguments, and Judge Ferguson might be sympathetic. She doesn't like courtroom theatrics. This wasn't theatrics. This was evidence presentation. In a ballroom in front of 300 people." Lester's voice rose. "Jake, I'm on your side. But you went nuclear, and there will be fallout. Wednesday's hearing would be critical." Jake knew that. But he also knew something Warren McDaniel didn't. Jake had more evidence. The recordings he'd played at the wedding were carefully selected for maximum impact, but they weren't everything. He had 3 months of documented conversations, videos, text messages that Allison thought were private, emails between Richard and his attorney about the Emma problem. If Warren wanted to fight dirty, Jake was ready. The rest of Sunday passed quietly. Emma wanted to watch movies, so they built a blanket fort in the living room and binged her favorite animated films. She didn't mention the wedding, and Jake didn't bring it up. But when she fell asleep against his shoulder during the third movie, she was smiling. Monday morning, Jake returned to Lincoln High School, expecting awkward conversations and administrative meetings. Instead, he found a note from Principal Dave Farley requesting his presence immediately. Dave's office was a cluttered space filled with academic awards and photos of students. Dave himself was 62, 3 years from retirement, and deeply pragmatic about the messy realities of his teachers' lives. "Coffee?" Dave offered, gesturing to the Keurig in the corner. "I'm fine." Jake sat down, waiting for the lecture about bringing negative attention to the school. "Good, because I'm drinking yours." Dave made himself a cup and sat behind his desk. "So, you blew up the internet this weekend." "Apparently. I've had 17 calls from parents. 8 support you completely. 7 think you're unhinged. 2 aren't sure, but wanted to express opinions anyway." Dave sipped his coffee. "The school board meets tonight. They'll discuss whether your very public personal drama reflects poorly on Lincoln High." Jake's stomach dropped. "Are they going to fire me?" "Not if I have anything to say about it." Dave set down his mug. "Jake, you're one of the best teachers we have. Your students love you. Your test scores are excellent, and you've never once brought personal issues into your classroom. What you did this weekend..." He paused. "I'm a father too. If someone treated my daughter the way your ex-wife treated Emma, I'd want to burn the world down. I didn't burn anything. I just showed people the truth. You showed 300 people and 12 million internet viewers the truth." Dave smiled slightly. "There's a difference. But the point is, I'm backing you with the board. You have my full support." Relief flooded through Jake. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. And you know it." Dave leaned forward. "Whatever happens Wednesday at that hearing, you need to be prepared for Allison and her attorney to come at you with everything. They're humiliated, and humiliated people get desperate." Jake nodded. "I know. Do you also know that half the parents who called are now questioning how custody cases are handled in family court? You've started something bigger than just your own case." That hadn't occurred to Jake. He'd been so focused on Emma, on his immediate battle, that he hadn't considered the broader implications. But Dave was right, the recordings had exposed more than just Allison and Richard's cruelty. They'd exposed how easily the system could be manipulated, how a good actor with a skilled attorney could rewrite reality. "I just wanted my daughter safe," Jake said quietly. "I know. But sometimes individual battles become movements." Dave stood, signaling the end of their meeting. "Watch your back, Jake. And if you need anything you call me." Tuesday brought more chaos. Allison's parents, Gary and Jeanette Winter, showed up at Jake's house unannounced just after Emma left for school. Jake opened the door to find them on his porch, both looking years older than they had at the wedding. "Can we come in?" Gary asked. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying or shouting. "Maybe both." Jake hesitated, then stepped aside. They'd never been close during the marriage. Allison had made sure of that, always painting Jake as the outsider who didn't understand their family dynamics. But they were Emma's grandparents, and they looked genuinely devastated. "Would you like coffee?" Jake offered. "Just water," Jeanette said. She sat on the couch like it might collapse beneath her, her hands twisting in her lap. Jake brought them water and sat across from them. "Waiting?" "We didn't know," Gary finally said. "About what Allison and Richard were planning. About the boarding school. About trying to cut you out of Emma's life. We didn't know any of it. Would you have stopped it if you had?" Jake asked, and he couldn't keep the edge from his voice. "Yes." Jeanette's eyes filled with tears. "Jake, we know we weren't good to you during the divorce. Allison told us things, and we believed her. We thought you were controlling, that you tried to isolate her from us. I never did any of that. We know." Gary's voice cracked. "We heard the recording, the one where she admitted to exaggerating for the court. And we realized we helped her do this to you. We testified against you. We told the judge you were unreliable." Jake remembered that day clearly. Jeanette, on the stand, explaining how Jake had gotten angry when Allison wanted to visit her parents. In reality, Jake had been frustrated because Allison had canceled Emma's birthday party to drive to her parents' house for a non-emergency. But Jeanette's testimony had been delivered with tearful conviction, and the judge had believed it. "Why are you here?" Jake asked. "Because we want to help fix this," Gary said. "We're going to testify on your behalf at the hearing Wednesday. We're going to tell Judge Ferguson that we were wrong, that we were manipulated, and that Emma belongs with you." Jake stared at them. "You'd go against your own daughter?" "Our daughter," Jeanette said firmly, threw a bouquet at our granddaughter's face and called her a mistake in front of 300 people. "I don't know who that woman is, but she's not the daughter I raised." She wiped her eyes. "Emma deserves better. You deserve better, and we're going to make this right. Warren will destroy you on cross-examination," Jake warned. "He'll make it look like you're only turning against Allison because of public pressure. Let him try." Gary's jaw set stubbornly. "We've already contacted an attorney. We're prepared to file for grandparent visitation rights as well, to support your custody case. We'll do whatever it takes." For the first time since the wedding, Jake felt hope kindle in his chest. Allison's parents testifying against her would be devastating to Warren's defense. Combined with Jake's evidence, it might actually be enough to win. "Thank you," Jake said, and meant it. They stayed for another hour, asking about Emma, apologizing repeatedly, trying to rebuild a bridge that Allison had spent years burning. When they left, Gary shook Jake's hand firmly. "Wednesday morning, we'll be there." "And Jake? What you did at that wedding took courage. Not everyone would have fought back." Jake watched them drive away, then sat on his porch steps and let himself breathe. The pieces were falling into place. Allison's own parents had turned against her. Public opinion was shifting. The hearing was in less than 24 hours. But he knew better than to get comfortable. Warren McDaniel was dangerous precisely because he was skilled at turning disasters into victories. He'd find some angle, some way to spin this. Jake needed to be ready for anything. That night, after Emma was asleep, Jake reviewed his entire evidence file one more time. Every recording, every video, every document. He created a timeline, cross-referenced dates, made sure his narrative was airtight. Then he did something he'd been avoiding. He listened to the voicemail Allison had left him Sunday night. Her voice was raw with fury. "You've destroyed me. Jake, destroyed us. Richard's family is threatening to cut him off unless he annuls the marriage. His businesses are hemorrhaging customers. My friends won't return my calls. All because you couldn't let me be happy. She took a shaky breath. But I'm not done. Warren says we can prove those recordings were manipulated. We'll get a forensic analysis. Show that you edited them to make me look bad. And when we do, you'll lose Emma forever. I'll make sure you never see her again. You'll be the cautionary tale every father fears, the one who fought too hard and lost everything. The voicemail ended. Jake deleted it and made a note to tell Lester about it. Empty threats, probably, but worth documenting. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rita Wise. Prepared to testify tomorrow if needed. Emma's welfare is what matters. You did the right thing. Another text. From Morris. Doug says good luck tomorrow. Also, he's been contacted by 3 other divorced dads asking about that Bluetooth adapter. You've started a revolution. Jake smiled despite himself. A revolution. He just wanted to protect his daughter. But if exposing one case of parental manipulation helped others see the truth about their own situations, maybe that was worth something too. Wednesday morning arrived cold and gray, threatening rain. Jake, dressed in his best suit, dropped Emma off with Morris and his wife Elena McCall for the day, and drove to the courthouse with his evidence file and a thermos of coffee he'd barely touched. Lester was waiting on the courthouse steps. Gary and Jeanette are already inside. So is Dr. Wise. Warren just arrived with Allison and Richard. He paused. Jake, you need to prepare yourself. Allison looks bad. Really bad. Like she hasn't slept in days. Good, Jake said, and meant it. Judge Betsy Ferguson's courtroom was smaller than Jake remembered from the divorce proceedings. Or maybe it just felt smaller because the stakes were so much higher. Allison sat at the defense table with Warren, wearing a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back severely. She looked diminished somehow, her usual confidence replaced with barely contained rage. Richard sat behind her, his expression stony. Gary and Jeanette sat on Jake's side of the courtroom. So did Dr. Wise, Morris, and Emma's kindergarten teacher Cecilia Sampson, who'd contacted Jake Sunday night to offer her support. Judge Ferguson entered, and everyone stood. She was in her mid-50s, known for being fair but no nonsense. She presided over Jake and Allison's divorce and had granted Allison primary custody based on her testimony and Warren's carefully constructed narrative. We're here, Judge Ferguson began, settling into her chair. Because of events that occurred this past Saturday at the wedding of Allison Baxter and Richard Foley. Events that have been viewed by millions of people and have raised serious questions about the current custody arrangement of minor child Emma Tanner. She looked at Jake. Mr. Tanner, you presented recordings and videos at your ex-wife's wedding that allegedly show her and her new husband planning to send Emma to boarding school and discussing ways to limit your parental involvement. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Jake stood. I did so because I believed Emma was in danger of being removed from my life entirely, and because I had evidence that Miss Baxter and Mr. Foley were emotionally abusing her. Those recordings were obtained illegally, Warren interjected, standing. My client's privacy was violated, and Mr. Tanner's actions constitute harassment and possibly stalking under Colorado law. Colorado is a one-party consent state for recordings, Lester countered. Emma was present during all recorded conversations, making them legal under state law. As for the accusation of stalking, Mr. Tanner attended a wedding he was invited to and presented evidence of child welfare concerns. That's not stalking, that's advocacy. Judge Ferguson held up a hand. I'll determine what's legal and what isn't. Mr. McDaniel, do you have evidence that these recordings were doctored or manipulated in any way? Warren hesitated. We're in the process of obtaining forensic analysis. So, that's a no. Judge Ferguson's expression was stern. Mr. Tanner, I'm going to listen to these recordings in full. Then, I'm going to hear testimony from both sides. Then I'm going to make a determination about Emma's custody arrangement going forward. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, Jake and Warren said in unison. The next 3 hours were brutal. Jake played every recording in sequence, watching Judge Ferguson's expression grow darker with each one. When they got to the recording of Richard calling Emma pathetic, the judge's jaw tightened visibly. Allison testified next, and Warren did his best to salvage the situation. She claimed the recordings were taken out of context, that she'd been venting frustrations but never meant what she said. Every mother gets overwhelmed, she said, tears streaming down her face. But I love Emma. I would never hurt her. You threw a bouquet at her face and called her a mistake in front of 300 people, Judge Ferguson said flatly. How do you explain that? I was stressed. The wedding, the pressure, I made a terrible mistake in the moment. Allison's voice broke. But Jake has been harassing us for months. He's obsessed with destroying my happiness. By presenting evidence of your plans to send Emma to boarding school without his consent, Judge Ferguson didn't sound convinced. Gary and Jeanette testified next, and their statements were devastating. They admitted to lying during the divorce proceedings, to believing Allison's manipulation, to helping her paint Jake as unstable. We were wrong, Gary said firmly, and we're here to make it right. Emma belongs with her father. Dr. Wise's testimony was clinical and damning. She explained Emma's anxiety, her fear of disappointing her mother, her expressed belief that she was unwanted. In my professional opinion, Dr. Wise concluded, Emma has been subjected to ongoing emotional abuse. Her current custody arrangement is not in her best interests. Warren tried to undermine Dr. Wise by suggesting she was biased, but it backfired when she calmly presented 3 months of detailed session notes documenting Emma's deteriorating mental state. Richard testified reluctantly, admitting that yes, he'd discussed boarding school options, but insisting it was for Emma's own good, to give her opportunities. His defensiveness made him look worse, not better. Finally, Judge Ferguson called a recess. I need time to review the evidence and testimony. We'll reconvene at 2 o'clock for my ruling. The lunch break was agonizing. Lester tried to reassure Jake, but both of them knew this could go either way. Judges didn't like being made to look foolish, and Judge Ferguson had been the one who'd granted Allison primary custody in the first place. She might rule against Jake just to avoid admitting she'd been wrong. 2 o'clock came. Everyone filed back into the courtroom. Judge Ferguson's expression was unreadable. I've reviewed all evidence and testimony, she began, and I'm prepared to make my ruling. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. First, regarding the recordings, while the method of obtaining them exists in a legal gray area, the content is deeply concerning. The discussions about boarding school, about limiting Mr. Tanner's involvement, and particularly the emotional abuse documented in these recordings, cannot be ignored. Allison's face went pale. Second, regarding the incident at the wedding, Miss Baxter, your behavior toward Emma was cruel and unacceptable. Regardless of stress or circumstances, throwing an object at a child and publicly calling her a mistake is not something I can overlook. Your Honor, Warren started. I'm not finished, Mr. McDaniel. Judge Ferguson's tone was ice. Third, the testimony from Emma's grandparents and her therapist paints a clear picture of a child who is suffering in her current environment. Dr. Wise's professional assessment is particularly compelling. She looked directly at Allison. Miss Baxter, I made a mistake 2 years ago. I believed your testimony during the divorce proceedings, and I granted you primary custody based on that testimony. I now understand that testimony was, at best, exaggerated and, at worst, completely fabricated. Your Honor, that's not, Allison began. It is. Judge Ferguson cut her off. I heard the recording where you admitted as much to your friend. You manipulated this court, Miss Baxter. And in doing so, you harmed your daughter and your ex-husband. She turned to Jake. Mr. Tanner, while I don't condone your methods, I understand why you felt they were necessary. The system failed Emma, and you took matters into your own hands. Jake held his breath. Therefore, I am hereby modifying the custody arrangement as follows. Mr. Tanner is awarded primary physical custody of Emma, effective immediately. Miss Baxter will have supervised visitation every other weekend, pending successful completion of parenting classes and ongoing therapy. Allison gasped. You can't. I can, and I am. Judge Ferguson's voice was firm. Additionally, I am ordering a full investigation into the custody proceedings from 2 years ago. If it is determined that false testimony was given under oath, perjury charges may be filed. Warren was on his feet. Your Honor, I request a stay of this order pending appeal. Request denied. This order is effective immediately. Miss Baxter, you will turn over Emma's belongings to Mr. Tanner by the end of this week. Any attempt to interfere with this custody arrangement will result in contempt charges. Judge Ferguson banged her gavel. We're adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Allison was screaming at Warren, who was already on his phone. probably calling for emergency appeals. Richard stormed out, his face red with fury. Gary and Jeanette were crying with relief. Jake sat motionless, barely processing what had just happened. He'd won. Lester grabbed his shoulder. "Jake, you did it. You actually did it." "I need to get Emma," Jake said, standing on shaky legs. "I need to tell her." "Go." Lester grinned. "I'll handle the paperwork." Jake left the courthouse in a daze, got in his car, and drove to Morris's house. Elena answered the door with a knowing smile. "I take it the hearing went well?" "I got primary custody," Jake said, and saying it out loud made it real. "Daddy!" Emma came running, throwing herself into his arms. "Did you see Mommy?" "I did." "Sweetheart." Jake held her tightly, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "And I have something to tell you. You're going to be living with me from now on. Is that okay?" Emma pulled back to look at him, her blue eyes wide. "Every day?" "Every day. Even school days?" "Especially school days." Emma's face broke into the biggest smile Jake had seen in years. "Really? I get to stay with you all the time?" "All the time," Jake confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "You're home, Em. You're finally home." She hugged him again, and Jake closed his eyes, letting relief and gratitude wash over him. The fight had been brutal. The cost had been high, but his daughter was safe, and that was all that mattered. Behind him, he heard Morris tell Elena quietly, "I'll be damned. The good guy actually won." Sometimes, Jake thought, carrying Emma to his car, justice required more than patience and proper channels. Sometimes it required burning everything down and rebuilding from the ashes. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was exactly what the world needed. 3 months later, Jake stood in Emma's new bedroom, her permanent bedroom, and watched her hang drawings on the wall. She'd started art therapy with Dr. Wise, processing everything that had happened through colors and shapes. The drawings were getting happier, brighter, more purple and yellow, less gray and black. "This one's us at the zoo," Emma explained, pointing to a stick figure drawing of a man and girl surrounded by elephants. "Remember when I got to feed the elephant a carrot?" "I remember." Jake smiled. "You were so brave. I wasn't scared because you were there." She said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Gary. "Emma's birthday party this weekend. Jeanette made her favorite cake. See you Saturday?" Jake had been hesitant about rekindling relationships with Allison's parents, but they'd proven themselves genuine. They visited every Sunday, bringing Emma small gifts and apologizing repeatedly for their role in the divorce. They'd also testified at the perjury investigation, which had resulted in Warren McDaniel facing potential disbarment for suborning perjury. Allison herself was facing charges, though her attorney a new one. Not Warren was working on a plea deal. Another text. This one from Morris. "Drinks Friday? Doug wants to meet the man, the myth, the legend who broke the internet." Jake smiled and texted back, "Can't. Emma's school concert Friday. Rain check?" Life had settled into a new rhythm. Jake had Emma full-time, with Allison getting supervised visits every other Saturday. Those visits were awkward and brief. Allison seemed uncertain how to interact with Emma now that the facade had crumbled, and Emma was hesitant to trust her mother again. Dr. Wise said that was normal, that rebuilding would take time. Maybe years. Maybe never. Richard's marriage to Allison had lasted 6 weeks. He'd filed for annulment citing fraud, claiming Allison had misrepresented her relationship with Emma and the potential legal consequences. The annulment was granted. His businesses had recovered somewhat, though he'd lost several major contracts and his reputation was permanently stained. The viral video had spawned a small movement. Jake received emails weekly from other parents, mostly fathers, but some mothers who'd been alienated from their children through similar manipulation. Some asked for advice. Some just wanted to share their stories. Jake responded when he could, but mostly he focused on Emma and rebuilding their life together. The school board had kept him on at Lincoln High, though Principal Dave had quietly suggested Jake might want to avoid parent-teacher conferences for a while. "Some parents think you're a hero," Dave had explained. "Others think you're a cautionary tale about what happens when people air their dirty laundry publicly. Best to let things cool down." Jake had agreed. He taught his classes, graded papers, and went home to his daughter every evening. That was enough. Emma finished hanging her drawings and turned to him. "Daddy, Can we get pizza for dinner? Absolutely. Jake ruffled her hair. Extra cheese? And pepperoni. She ran ahead of him, her footsteps thundering down the stairs in the way only a happy child's could. Jake followed more slowly, taking in the house he'd fought so hard to make into a home. It wasn't perfect. There were still boxes to unpack, repairs to make, 1,000 small tasks to complete. But it was theirs. Safe and stable and full of the kind of love that didn't come with conditions or cruelty. His phone rang. Lester Darling's name flashed on the screen. Hey, Lester. What's up? Just wanted to give you a heads up. Warren's disbarment hearing is next month. They're calling you as a witness. Jake had been expecting this. The state bar had taken the perjury charges seriously, launching a full investigation into Warren's practices. They'd found a pattern, coaching clients to exaggerate, helping them construct false narratives, exploiting gray areas in family law to win cases regardless of truth. I'll testify, Jake said. Whatever they need. I figured you would. Also, there's something else. Lester paused. I got a call from a documentary filmmaker. They want to tell your story. Make a short film about parental alienation and fighting for custody. Jake's immediate instinct was to refuse. He'd never wanted fame or attention, but then he thought about those emails, about all the parents who'd reached out with similar stories. Maybe sharing his experience could help others navigate the system. Maybe it could prevent other children from suffering the way Emma had. Let me think about it, Jake said. After they hung up, Jake found Emma in the kitchen, already pulling out plates for pizza. She was humming to herself, some song from her last school concert. Hey, Jake said, sitting at the kitchen table. Can I ask you something? Sure, Daddy. Are you happy? Living here, I mean, with just us. Emma stopped humming and looked at him seriously. I'm really happy. I don't have to worry about being bad anymore, or being too loud, or making Richard mad. She came over and climbed into his lap, even though she was getting too big for it. I just get to be me. Jake hugged her tightly, blinking back tears. You always get to be you, sweetheart. Always. I know. She said it with such simple confidence that Jake's heart swelled. Because you love me no matter what. That's right. No matter what. They ordered pizza, watched a movie, and Jake tucked Emma into bed at 8:30. She fell asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, her face peaceful in the dim glow of her nightlight. Jake stood in her doorway for a long moment, just watching her breathe. 3 months ago, he'd walked into a wedding prepared to blow up his ex-wife's perfect day. He'd been scared, furious, desperate. He'd known the consequences could be severe legal trouble, social ostracism, complete alienation from everyone in Allison's circle. But he'd also known that doing nothing meant losing Emma. The choice had been terrible and necessary. And standing here now, watching his daughter sleep safely in her own room in their home, Jake knew he'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from Dr. Wise. Emma's progress is remarkable. You should be proud of both of you. Jake texted back. Thank you. For everything. Then he silenced his phone, checked the locks on all the doors and windows, and settled onto the couch with a book he'd been trying to read for weeks. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood settling and the distant sound of traffic. For the first time in years, Jake felt at peace. The war was over. The battles had been fought and won. And while scars remained Emma's nightmares, Allison's supervised visits, the lingering tension with extended family they were healing. Jake thought about the version of himself from 3 months ago, standing in a wedding ballroom with his phone in his hand and his daughter crying in his arms. That man had been pushed to his absolute limit, forced to choose between propriety and protection. He'd chosen Emma. Every time, without hesitation, and as Jake finally started reading his book, he smiled slightly, thinking about all those emails from other parents asking for advice. If they asked what lesson he'd learned from this whole ordeal, what wisdom he could share, Jake knew exactly what he'd say. Fight for your children. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And when the system fails them, be prepared to burn it all down and rebuild from scratch. Because some battles are worth any cost. And protecting the people you love is always worth fighting for. The documentary premiered 6 months after the custody hearing. Jake had ultimately agreed to participate, with strict conditions. Emma's face would be blurred, her voice altered, her identity protected. The filmmaker, a woman named Joy Fernandez, had understood immediately. This isn't about exploitation, she told Jake during their first meeting. It's about showing how broken the family court system can be and how hard good parents have to fight just to protect their kids. The finished film was 30 minutes long, titled When the System Fails, A Father's Fight. It featured Jake's interviews, recordings from the wedding, testimony from Gary and Jeanette, and analysis from family law experts about how easily courts could be manipulated. It won awards at 3 documentary festivals and sparked renewed debate about custody laws, parental alienation, and the need for reform. Several states began reviewing their family court procedures. Colorado introduced legislation requiring recorded proceedings in all custody cases and stricter penalties for perjury. Jake watched these developments with cautious optimism. Change was slow, and bureaucracy was thick, but at least people were talking about the problem. Emma, meanwhile, was thriving. Second grade brought new friends, better grades, and a confidence Jake hadn't seen in years. She'd started calling his house home without hesitation, decorating her room with posters and trinkets that reflected her actual personality rather than what Allison had imposed. The supervised visits with Allison had dwindled to once a month, then once every 6 weeks. Emma didn't ask to go more often, and Allison didn't push. The relationship was cordial but distant, like acquaintances rather than mother and daughter. Dr. Wise said that might change someday, or it might not. Either way, Emma was learning she didn't need her mother's approval to be happy. Richard Foley had moved to California, selling his dealerships and starting over. Jake had heard through Gary that Richard's family had cut him off financially after the wedding video went viral. Without their backing, his business empire had crumbled. Last Jake heard, Richard was working as a sales manager at someone else's dealership in San Diego. A significant fall from grace. Warren McDaniel had been disbarred. The state bar had found overwhelming evidence of coaching clients to lie, fabricating testimony, and exploiting legal loopholes to win cases regardless of truth or ethics. He'd faced criminal charges as well, 3 counts of suborning perjury. His trial was scheduled for next spring. Allison had taken a plea deal on her perjury charges. 3 years probation, mandatory therapy, and community service. She'd also been ordered to pay Jake's legal fees from both the divorce and the custody modification. The total was substantial, and Jake knew she couldn't afford it. Gary had quietly offered to help, but Jake had declined. Let her figure it out, he'd said. Actions have consequences. Now, standing in the crowd at Emma's second-grade winter concert, Jake watched his daughter sing Jingle Bells with her classmates and felt something he hadn't felt in years, uncomplicated joy. No anxiety about pickup times, no dread of handing Emma over to people who didn't value her, no fear that every goodbye might be the last. Morris stood beside him, recording the concert on his phone. She's got a good voice, Morris observed. She gets it from her mom, Jake admitted. Allison used to sing. That must be complicated, acknowledging the good parts. It is. Jake kept his eyes on Emma. But Emma deserves to know her mother wasn't always the villain. That there were good parts before everything fell apart. The concert ended with a rousing rendition of Frosty the Snowman, and Emma bounded off stage to find Jake. She crashed into him with the force of a small hurricane, chattering about the performance and whether he'd seen her hit the high note. I saw everything, Jake assured her. You were amazing. Can we get hot chocolate on the way home? Absolutely. They stopped at a small cafe near the school, one of Emma's favorite places. She ordered hot chocolate with extra marshmallows and a cookie shaped like a snowman. Jake got coffee and listened to her recap the concert in exhaustive detail, occasionally glancing at his phone to check messages. One message stood out. From Allison's number. I saw the documentary. You made me look like a monster. Jake considered his response carefully. Part of him wanted to fire back that she'd made herself look like a monster through her own words and actions. But that wouldn't help Emma, and it wouldn't change anything. Instead, he typed, I showed the truth. If you look like a monster, maybe consider why that is. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. Then silenced his phone and focused on Emma. Daddy, you're not listening, Emma complained, waving a marshmallow-covered spoon at him. Sorry, sweetheart. You were saying? I said that Lily's mom asked if we wanted to come to her birthday party next weekend. Can we go? Of course. We'll get her a good present. Emma beamed. I like when you say yes to things. What do you mean? Mommy used to say no to everything. Playdates, parties, sleepovers. She said they were too much trouble. Emma dunked her cookie in her hot chocolate. But you say yes. It makes me happy. Jake's throat tightened. I'm glad you're happy, Em. I am. She said it with such conviction that Jake had to look away before he started crying in the middle of the cafe. They finished their drinks and drove home through light snow. Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from performing and too much sugar. Jake carried her inside, helped her into pajamas, and tucked her into bed for the second time that evening. Love you, Daddy, she mumbled, already half asleep. Love you too, sweetheart. Jake retreated to his office and pulled up the documentary on his laptop. He'd only watched it once, at the premiere, finding the experience surreal and uncomfortable. But now, alone in his office, he watched it again. Joy Fernandez had done remarkable work. She'd woven together interviews, recordings, and expert testimony into a narrative that was compelling without being exploitative. Jake's story came through clearly. A good father pushed to extremes by a broken system, fighting for his daughter against overwhelming odds. The comment section was still active, even months after release. This made me cry. My ex did the same thing, turned our kids against me. I've been fighting for 3 years. Thank you for sharing your story. You gave me hope that I can win custody of my son. This is why family courts need reform. Too many good parents lose their kids because the system favors whoever lies best. But there were negative comments too. He violated his ex-wife's privacy and ambushed her at her wedding. That's not heroic, that's creepy. The recordings were probably edited to make him look good. We're only hearing one side. If he'd really cared about his daughter, he would have handled this through proper channels, not social media spectacle. Jake read them all, the supportive and the critical, and felt neither vindicated nor ashamed. He'd done what he had to do. Some people would understand that. Others wouldn't. Both reactions were valid. His phone buzzed. Another message from Allison. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. For Emma. Jake stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed, prove it through your actions, not your words. Emma deserves consistency, not promises. This time, Allison didn't respond. Over the next few months, she did start to prove it. The supervised visits became slightly less awkward. She listened when Emma talked instead of interrupting. She asked about school, friends, interests, small things, but genuine. Dr. Wise cautiously suggested increasing visit frequency, and Jake agreed. 1 weekend a month became 2. Supervision was relaxed to a neutral third party instead of a court-appointed monitor. Emma seemed okay with it, which was all that mattered. Is Mommy getting better? Emma asked one night after a visit. I think she's trying, Jake said carefully. Do you want her to get better? Emma considered this seriously. I want her to be nice, like she used to be before Richard. That's fair, but I don't want to live with her again. I want to stay here. You're staying here, Jake promised. That's not changing. Emma nodded, satisfied, and went back to her homework. Jake watched her work, marveling at how resilient children could be. Emma had been through trauma that would have broken many adults. She'd been called a mistake, treated as an inconvenience, caught in the middle of a war she didn't understand. Yet, here she was, doing multiplication tables and planning birthday parties, and slowly, carefully rebuilding a relationship with her mother. She was stronger than Allison, stronger than Richard, maybe even stronger than Jake. The 1-year anniversary of the wedding came and went quietly. Jake had wondered if it would be difficult, triggering old memories and emotions. But the day passed like any other school, dinner, bedtime routine. The wedding itself had become part of their history rather than an open wound. Emma never asked about it, never wanted to watch the video or hear the recordings. That was sad time, she'd said once when Jake gently asked if she wanted to talk about it. I like now time better. Now, time was indeed better. They'd found their rhythm school and work and weekends at the park. Piano lessons on Thursdays. Art therapy on Tuesdays. Sunday dinners with Gary and Jeanette, who'd become regular fixtures in Emma's life. Jake had even started dating, though cautiously, a woman named Kirsten Kane, a librarian at the public library who Emma had met during story time and immediately liked. They'd been on 5 dates, all of them easy and comfortable. Kirsten knew about the custody battle everyone in their small circle did, but she didn't treat Jake like a celebrity or a cautionary tale. She just treated him like a person. You should invite her to dinner, Emma had suggested after meeting Kirsten for the third time. I like her. She's funny. We'll see, Jake had said, not wanting to rush anything. But tonight, finishing up paperwork at his desk, Jake sent Kirsten a text, dinner this weekend. Emma's with her grandparents, Saturday night. The response came quickly. I'd love that. Jake smiled and set down his phone. Life was moving forward. Not perfectly, nothing ever was, but steadily, healthily, in the right direction. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago, standing in a ballroom with evidence of his ex-wife's cruelty and a decision to make. That man had been desperate, furious, willing to sacrifice everything for his daughter. Jake was still that man, would always be that man. But he was also more now, a single father who'd learned to balance protection with healing, justice with mercy, truth with moving forward. The wedding video would exist forever on the internet, a digital monument to one family's collapse. But it was no longer the defining moment of Jake's life. It was just a chapter, however dramatic, in a longer story. And the story that mattered, Emma's story, their story together, was still being written. Jake closed his laptop, checked on Emma one last time, deeply asleep, rabbit tucked under her arm, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new moments, new opportunities to be the father Emma deserved. But for now, in this quiet house with his daughter sleeping safely down the hall, Jake Tanner felt something he'd chased for 2 years and finally caught. Peace. 2 years after the wedding, Emma's 10th birthday party was held at the local bowling alley. 20 kids from her 4th grade class attended, along with their parents, grandparents, Gary and Jeanette, Morris and Elena, and to everyone's surprise, Allison. She'd arrived early, helping Jake set up decorations and carrying in the birthday cake Jeanette had made. They worked together awkwardly but civilly, navigating the strange reality of co-parenting after years of warfare. Thank you for inviting me, Allison said quietly while Emma was off with her friends. I know I don't deserve. Emma wanted you here, Jake interrupted. That's what matters. Allison nodded, blinking back tears. She looked different than she had 2 years ago, older, harder in some ways, but softer in others. Therapy had helped, so had consequences. The probation, the community service, the public humiliation, all of it had forced her to reckon with who she'd become. She'd never be the mother she was before the divorce. That version of Allison was gone, replaced by someone more self-aware, but also more damaged. But she was trying, and Emma had decided that trying was enough to warrant a place in her life. Richard was not invited. Emma had made that clear. He was mean to me, she told Jake matter-of-factly. I don't want him at my party. Fair enough. The party was chaotic and loud and perfect. Emma bowled 3 strikes, ate too much cake, and laughed until her face hurt. Jake watched from the sidelines, camera in hand, documenting every moment. Kirsten sat beside him, her hand casually on his knee. They'd been dating for 18 months now, and Emma adored her. Kirsten's nice, Emma had said when Jake asked how she felt about their relationship. She makes you smile. She does, Jake had agreed. Then I like her. Simple logic but effective. As the party wound down and parents started collecting their exhausted children, Emma ran over to Jake and threw her arms around him. Best birthday ever, Daddy. I'm glad, sweetheart. He hugged her tightly. You deserve the best. Can we do it again next year? Absolutely. Though maybe we'll go laser tag next time. Yes. Emma pumped her fist in the air, then ran off to say goodbye to her friends. Allison approached carefully. She seems really happy. She is, Jake confirmed. You've done a good job with her. Better than I ever could have. Jake didn't know how to respond to that. It felt like a trap, or maybe genuine remorse. With Allison, it was sometimes hard to tell. We're figuring it out as we go, he finally said. That's all any parent can do. Allison nodded and left without saying anything else. Jake watched her go, feeling neither satisfaction nor pity. Just a sort of detached acknowledgement that this was their reality, now broken family, fragile peace, trying to do right by a child they'd both failed in different ways. Later, after all the guests had left and Emma had opened her presents in the bowling alley's party room, they drove home through the early evening. Emma chattered about her friends, The presents, the cake. She was wired on sugar and excitement, nowhere near ready for sleep despite it being almost 8 o'clock. Can we watch a movie when we get home? Emma asked. One movie, Jake agreed. Then bed, because you got school tomorrow. Can Kirsten stay for the movie? Jake glanced at Kirsten, who smiled. If that's okay with your dad. More than okay, Jake said. They settled in the living room, Emma between Jake and Kirsten on the couch, and put on some animated film Emma had been wanting to see. Halfway through, Emma fell asleep against Jake's shoulder, worn out from her birthday excitement. Kirsten carefully extracted herself from the couch. I should head home. Let you get her to bed. Thanks for today, Jake said quietly, trying not to wake Emma. It meant a lot. I wouldn't have missed it. Kirsten kissed him softly. She's a great kid. You've done really well with her. After Kirsten left, Jake carried Emma upstairs and tucked her into bed. She stirred slightly, mumbling something about bowling strikes, then settled back into sleep. Jake stood in her doorway, same as he had hundreds of times before, just watching her breathe. She'd be 11 soon, then 12, then a teenager. Eventually, she'd be grown and gone, living her own life. The thought both terrified and excited him. But for now, she was still his little girl, safe in her room, surrounded by birthday presents and drawings on the walls and all the evidence of a childhood that was finally stable. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Joy Fernandez. When the system fails, just won a regional Emmy. Thought you'd want to know. Another milestone in a story that wouldn't quite end. The documentary continued to circulate, continued to spark discussions, continued to help other parents navigate impossible situations. Jake received fewer emails. Now the initial wave of attention had faded, but the ones he did get were always meaningful. People thanking him for sharing his story. People telling him they'd won custody because his case had set precedent. People asking for advice he wished he didn't have to give. He responded to Joy. Congratulations. Emma says hi. Then he turned off his phone, checked the locks, and settled into his nightly routine. Tomorrow would bring work, school pickups, dinner preparations, homework help, the ordinary rhythms of single parenthood that he'd fought so hard to protect. And as Jake finally headed to bed himself, he thought about that moment 2 years ago, standing in a ballroom with his finger on a phone screen, about to detonate his ex-wife's perfect day. He'd asked himself then if it was worth it, if Emma's well-being justified the scorched earth approach, if he could live with the consequences. Now, with Emma sleeping peacefully upstairs and a stable life built from the ashes of that wedding, Jake had his answer. Worth it. Absolutely. Completely. Unquestionably worth it. And he'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Because that's what fathers did. They protected their children, no matter the cost. They fought impossible battles with whatever weapons they had. They burned down kingdoms if that's what it took to save the people they loved. Jake Tanner had burned down a wedding. But from those ashes, he'd built something better. A home, a life, a future where his daughter could grow up safe and loved and free from the toxicity that had nearly consumed her. Sometimes justice required fire. Sometimes it required standing up in front of 300 people and showing them the ugly truth they'd rather ignore. Sometimes it required becoming the villain in someone else's story so you could be the hero in the one that mattered. And sometimes, when the system failed and the courts wouldn't listen and the only voice left was yours, the only choice was to make damn sure that voice was heard. Jake had made sure. And Emma was safe. That was all that mattered. That was everything. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.